Thank you so much for joining us today for remapping the customer journey for a post-pandemic world. As I believe Emily was starting to say, I'm Kate Muth. I'm the Director of Strategy here at Cake and Arrow, and on the line we have Emily Smith-Cardino, who's our Director of Content Marketing. And as you may know, we're an experienced design and innovation company working with organizations specifically in insurance, but also a few other brands as well, to identify new opportunities and design innovative products and services grounded in real customer needs. And those real customer needs and how to make the most of them are what we're here to talk about today. Jess, are my slides still advancing?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to leave you on, just break in at any point if you're not hearing or seeing anything. And that is a good cue to the emergency break. So we're all going through something like what just happened to me. We are all in a moment of pause, panic, and reflection. And it happened somewhere in the middle of March for us, early March. May have been different timing for you depending on where you're located in the States. But there was a moment where everything sort of slowed down and then screeched to a halt. And for us at Cake and Arrow, as I said, that started around March 9th, where all of us in the office were kind of like, COVID, not really a thing. The days started going by. We put hand sanitizer in the restrooms. Conferences were being canceled and moved to Zoom like this. We thought about taking the stairs. We started letting people work remote if they felt more comfortable, but some of us were still going into the office, wondering if we could bike to work to avoid the subways. I have two small children. Emily has a little baby. Some others of us have school children at home. Started wondering what we were going to do for childcare if the schools actually closed. It seemed impossible. And then by Friday, we were actually starting to think, oh no, what if we actually get sick? And then we started thinking about, oh, it's not about us getting sick. It's about our general responsibility to everyone around us to make sure that we all get through this together. And we started understanding what it meant to flatten that curve and not overload the health system. So like everyone else in New York, we went home, and we've been home ever since, and we're starting to wonder, now what? So in this environment that's been transformed by the pandemic, your plans have changed, our plans have changed, our clients' plans have changed, your customers' plans have changed, and these changes might end up being permanent or at least long-lasting, some of them. So what's different today, right now? How have our lives been upended? What kind of impact is that having on everyone? And we're going to go through some sort of stats and points that are not going to be news to anyone because they're news to everyone. It's all the news that we're reading is what's going on in the world with this thing. We all know that work is different. We've been forced to manage things remotely or mismanage them remotely and do our best. And other people are working with a greater degree of risk. Work is very remote, and the Zoom stock price, although it's gone up and down a little bit, we all know that it kind of zoomed right up there with millions of people working from home and just sort of staying home with this crisis. We also know that for a lot of people, work looks a little bit different because it's less safe. They aren't staying home. They're frontline workers, they're essential workers, and they're out there in the world facing the public and not necessarily being compensated for that extra risk, which is something that's a challenge for a lot of people and something that people are working on from a policy level, but possibly not fast enough for this particular pandemic. We also know that family life is different. I just ushered my two kids out the door, so I'd have a little bit of quiet. They may come back, but I'm sure many of you have somebody with their chin on their shoulder asking what's going on your computer and whether or not they can play a game right now. Families are kind of tense. We all need more childcare. Different parts of the country are opening up, and so this is varying by different degrees, but we all know that this is sort of an ongoing thing as the virus fluctuates and rules fluctuate in different places. But we also know that families are doing their best and trying. We have a funny stat here that 88% of parents reported that they and their children had shown love for each other in the last 2 weeks, which isn't necessarily all that surprising, but what is surprising perhaps is that anyone was surveying that in the first place, because we all know how trying this time can be. We also know that consumer behavior is different. We're all stuck at home. We don't know what's going to happen next. And people are stockpiling things and also drastically reducing overall spending. This is an interesting stat here for us, those of us who live in Brooklyn. I don't know if this is everyone's experience, but for the Brooklyn people, everyone is sort of nurturing a little sourdough starter on their counter, and that may be contributing to the 268% increase in King Arthur flower sales. Not everyone really, but it can feel like that when you're looking at social media and seeing all the pictures. But we also know that overall consumer spending kind of dropped off a little bit of a cliff here. It's actually the lowest since it's been recorded. It went down 16.4, the biggest drop since it started being recorded. And we also know that people's expectations are different. With the kind of unprecedented events, people are leaning on institutions and programs in ways that maybe they hadn't before. And they're expecting more. So we all got, or many of us got, stimulus checks, and now 84%, even though there was some debate about it early, now 84% are in favor of a second stimulus check, and I believe they're working on that, and it might be something that appears sometime in July. And we also know that citizens are actually accepting more. An unprecedented number of people have filed for initial unemployment claims since mid-March. And Emily and I know this kind of firsthand. We both have husbands who are kind of freelance workers and never would have necessarily thought of themselves as eligible for unemployment before, when they had sort of a lapse in work. But this time, with the uncertainty and knowing that it wasn't just a normal up and down, it might be something that's here to stay. They applied for that and are recipients of that. And so that's been something that has been new, at least in my family, and probably new for a lot of people. And it's something that people are thinking about in new ways because they're having that experience. And we also know that overall, people's outlook is different. Emotionally, socially, they're just having some different feelings and some different tensions and anxieties. A lot of people are not so happy. The rate of people saying that they're very happy is the lowest since at least 1972, only 14%. A lot of people are lonely with social isolation, obviously. Activities and relationships, excellent or good, is down about 10 percentage points since 2018. And a lot of people, of course, are concerned just at a broad level that the country is on the wrong track. Again, the worst numbers since the first question was first asked. But within these drastically altered circumstances, people are finding space and motivation to adopt some new behaviors, and some of those might be kind of interesting and okay. We know that a lot of people are connecting with their neighbors and communities in ways that maybe they haven't before. GoFundMe and those kinds of crowdsourced fundraising sites have raised millions of dollars for people looking to support themselves, their families, their businesses, their employees since this crisis began. And a lot of people are feeling a lot more connected to their communities. In many neighborhoods, mutual aid or mutual benefit groups are forming to shop for homebound neighbors and kind of give and take with people that maybe they're just meeting for the first time. I know that's happening in my neighborhood and a lot of the people that we know. And that kind of is behavior that's not necessarily new, but it's been kind of adopted by a much wider range of people. And we also know that with the pandemic and all of the attendant circumstances, a lot of things have kind of been shaken up, and a lot of people are speaking out in ways that they wouldn't before. Not to equate what's going on with the Black Lives Matter protests with what's going on with the pandemic, but there is sort of a new spirit of sort of taking it on for themselves, and with all the mistrust in institutions, finding voices, getting out there and talking more. And another thing that many businesses are doing is adapting in ways that maybe they wouldn't have ever thought was possible before. You've probably seen stories about distilleries and breweries retooling their production lines to make hand sanitizer. In New York, we have online marriage permits, which is digitizing a process that perhaps should have always been digital to begin with to get a permit for marriage. But this pandemic has sort of spurred some of that optimization and retooling. And we have people in different contexts reaching new audiences online. Yoga teachers, kids classes, webinars like this. People are reaching out and getting kind of people who maybe they wouldn't have thought of as customers are coming into the fold. And so when we're anticipating the new normal, what might be here to stay, it seems like there's some things that are sort of trends that are gathering that feel like potentially might have some legs going forward. There's obviously going to be a new relationship to work and home life after this is all over, or if it doesn't ever quite end in the way that we think it will. More people are going to be working remote, and there'll have to be some sort of reckoning with the increased risk for in-person work. There's altered expectations for institutional aid. People, as I said, who are kind of grappling with getting government support for the first time, or seeing their neighbors need it in ways that maybe weren't as visible before. That's bound to have some sort of longer lasting impact on how people look at those things. And we're also imagining, based on some research we've done and just sort of overall zeitgeist, that there might be an increased openness to community support and doing some more mutual aid sort of activities. So with all of that as context and background, obviously we're all living through this. None of that was probably news to many people on this, but what do we do to make the best of this rare opportunity, this emergency break where we're all sort of a little bit in limbo and wondering what to do next and how to make the best of it? It's been a seismic shift. It's exposed a lot of fault lines in our society, our economy, our institutions. People are reprioritizing their needs. Values of individuals and institutions, organizations are being tested and realigned. And business problems are really being distilled down to their essence. And in some ways, even though everyone's experience is unique and individual, we are all going to be starting from scratch in some way or another. And with that, there's sort of an opportunity to look around and say, how could we be doing something better? How could we get out ahead of trends that we're seeing coming? But in times like these, when the outlook isn't clear, the impulse may be to hunker down, to suspend new initiatives, to pare it down to essential operations only, to really try to reserve resources for when things are back to normal. But doing something, moving, innovating has its rewards. You have an opportunity to get ahead of the game while the playing field is sort of level. And especially for institutions and organizations like financial services and insurance that maybe aren't always moving as fast as some other industries, or might be sort of locked into old ways of thinking. This is a chance to say those old ways of thinking may not be relevant right now, and we have as good a chance as anybody to move further faster and pivot as needed, invest in the future, and really anticipate what the new normal might entail and what those needs might be. And there's risks on either side of this. No matter what, some businesses will fail, as always, but especially now. Hunkering down, you may miss opportunities. Taking action, you may take the wrong action, and either way, there may be regrets. But we know from history that companies that invest in innovation, invest in action during crises, tend to outperform their peers during recovery. So when we're looking at this chart here, it's basically just showing us that Um, Companies that invested in innovation during the 2009 downturn, years later are 30% outperforming the S&P 500. So those are pretty good numbers. So how can businesses respond right now? Obviously, the first thing is to just jump in and do something to kind of resist that tendency to wait it out. And then do whatever you can to make sure that your business is aligning with emerging needs and understanding where the customers are right now and how you might be able to help them. You can take advantage of openings, people are opening to new ideas, changing behaviors, and there's also just that opportunity to accelerate, innovate, and move forward. And today, we're going to be talking more about how to align with those emerging needs and really get your finger on the pulse of what your customers need right now, right today. So where to start with that? How can we use this time to move forward? We say there's no time like the present. To start here and start now and talk to your customers, ask them directly how COVID-19 has impacted them, their lives, what their experiences are, their needs, their values, their expectations, disappointments, unexpected delights, finding out what's going on with them right now and how kind of their paradigm has shifted and how they're navigating new experiences. And with that, you're able to identify new opportunities to ease immediate pain and potentially support future growth. And at Cake and Arrow, this is something that we do, we believe in all the time, not just now, but now more than ever. We believe that design and innovation begin with identifying really tangible needs of real people. Really understanding their context, how they think, feel, act, and understanding those things really open that door to meaningful transformation. And for any of you who have worked with us in the past, you know that pretty much any project we engaged with, there's a week or two in, we start planning our first research event. And more often than not, that first research event is a round of user interviews. Because we believe that insights from user research can help keep your business or our projects on track. It helps keep us focused on our customers, our users, our consumers, helps us prioritize so we can focus on really what's important and not sort of internal biases or pet projects. It helps you to evaluate opportunities and make better decisions, reducing risk, and keep you relevant and future focused, which is really important right now. And when we're talking about user research, there's a lot of different methods that answer a lot of different kinds of questions. We're looking at from a spectrum of behavioral to attitudinal. What are people doing? What are people saying? Qualitative to quantitative. Why are they doing and saying what they're doing? How can we fix their problems? Quantitative, how many of them, how much of them are doing and saying those things? And obviously methods can be used in different ways, but they kind of break out in different quadrants. But as I said, Cake and Arrow, we really believe in the quick uptake of one-on-one personal interviews to really jumpstart the discovery process and get inside our customers' heads. And we're actually currently studying topically how small business owners are responding to COVID-19. So our customers are generally not necessarily small business owners, but as you may know, we do a lot of primary research into topics and audiences that are of interest to the people we work with. And many of our clients and the people we serve, their customers are small business owners. So we want to have a point of view on how these important users and customers are responding to COVID-19. So we can share that with kind of the world and contribute to the overall knowledge of how we're all getting through this together and hopefully spur some opportunities and innovation with ourselves and possibly with other people who see what we've come up with. And today, to kind of give you a way to think about how you might approach talking to your customers, we're going to walk you through some of the work in progress findings and how we're synthesizing those with that small business audience. So we have conducted, right now we're at 8 hour-long remote interviews to better understand how they're responding to the pandemic. We're talking to business owners with less than 50 employees in a range of different fields. We have a chiropractor, a rug store owner, kind of an art space owner, bookstore, a sort of sampling of different kinds of Main Street and other kinds of small businesses. And we're doing that. It's a small sample size. We believe in small sample sizes for this early kind of phase, because once you start talking to even 6, 7, 8 people, you start seeing patterns that kind of coalesce into themes and prompt you to ask additional research questions and start planning how you can validate those findings and sort of hone in more on the opportunities that you're identifying. It's a quick and easy way to really survey a representative sample and get really actionable insights. And we'll share some of those early insights with you just to ground us when we're starting to look through some of the synthesis techniques that we will kind of step through in a bit. But unsurprisingly, small businesses are frustrated with what's going on currently. The process of securing loans and other funding has been rough. Trying to figure out the official guidance for businesses has been as challenging as it's been for individuals and different locations. And the government policies, many of them are reading them to favor larger businesses and corporations over businesses of their size. But sort of conversely, they're also appreciating a little bit the room to breathe. Like we're talking about this pause and this emergency break as an opportunity to reflect on what's going on and look around and see what's happening and see where there are opportunities. Many of our small business owners said the same thing. They're using the time to think about launching new initiatives, digitizing, optimizing operations that maybe they've been holding off on, streamlining their businesses, resetting priorities, and making smart investments. And obviously, they're also trying to maintain whatever operations they can to keep their business running in real time. But there's just some sort of openings to look at things a little bit differently. And for some people who've had to shut down for a period of time, they have time to actually work on things and reevaluate a little bit. And we also have learned that small businesses have some small advantages. It's easier for them to pivot, and they are more tied into their communities and professional networks and can get some kind of mutual support from those organizations. So that was just sort of a taste of what we're learning to provide some background for what's next. But keep that in mind when we're thinking about how we're transforming findings like these into more actionable insights. So how do we synthesize our user research to identify opportunity? We're going to look at a few different techniques. This is not exhaustive and it's not like a complete process. We're, as I said, kind of midstream on this, and we're sharing with you where we're at because we're already sort of starting to see benefits and insights out of what we're doing with this process work, and think it's worth sharing because it's something that can be replicated quickly and easily in any organization. First, we're defining who our customers are with using the data that we've collected. We're going through some exercises to build more empathy and understand things better from their point of view. And then we're stretching that empathy out over the course of several phases to map the journey of their experience. So to define our customers, we're using those inputs to understand what they have in common and what's making them unique. And we considered what we heard through our sessions, and we kind of plotted the people we talked to on a few different dimensions. We looked at whether or not they were more values driven or business driven, and we looked at whether their affinity was more local or with sort of a professional organization. So on the right side, we had people who were identifying more with perhaps professional organizations, like they were dentists, doctors, people with a credentialed title, versus people who are more community members, and business people. And when we started putting those people in these different quadrants and looking at some of the patterns, we found that they sort of coalesced into 4 kind of buckets or personas that were distinct and had characteristics and traits that distinguished them from the pack. And remember, we only talked to 8 people, but we did find strong enough signals within those 8 to really come up with the mental model of how this grouping shook out. And again, we wouldn't necessarily take this as gospel. We would validate it through future research and make sure that we're continuing to add to our knowledge and adjust as we learn more. But for a place to start, this is really useful for us. We have the entrepreneurial professional, who's that credentialed person in the trade, but also a highly savvy and ambitious business person. We have the creative entrepreneur, who perhaps doesn't fit into traditional workplaces and might work in more creative fields and see that as kind of a differentiator for them, their creativity. We have the community culture catalyst, which we will be renaming as soon as we can think of something catchier. And this person is that person driven more by values and kind of disillusioned with the way the traditional working world is set up, and is trying to make a difference in their community by turning their passion into something that they can live off of. And then finally, we have the professional business owners who view owning a business as a profession. They may be somebody who is sort of a pillar in the community, might be carrying on a family business with deep local roots, and really identifies as a business person first. And when we're looking at personas, obviously you may know this, this is not something that's not used widely, but it's a fictional but realistic kind of archetype. And we use personas to both summarize and kind of quantify and externalize our research, and also to align with working teams and clients on who we're designing for or who we're sort of innovating for if we're working on a more of a product innovation project. And you can use personas to help you define your goals, your customers' needs, and really get kind of clarity on all of that and understand their context. And you can also use it as a standard to evaluate design decisions against and inform some other artifacts that we'll be looking at. And for our purposes, we're going to focus in on our entrepreneurial professional, Nicole, who is a board certified dermatologist who's just recently taken over a practice and inherited an office full of staff, technology, sort of operations and workflows that she's working to make her own. She has pretty hefty, almost $1 million in loans, and has a young child, and is so juggling a lot of things and still planning to help her business grow before the pandemic hit. And so now she's kind of had to close down and is in the process of reopening and evaluating what she can do during this time to kind of make that business her own in possibly an accelerated way. And to get inside her head a little bit and understand more of her attitudes, mindsets, motivations, and needs, we worked on something called an empathy map, which again, people may have done before. It's a framework that kind of divides your user or customer's mindset into 4 facets and forces you to think about what they're thinking, feeling, saying, or doing in relationship to a circumstance or context that you defined. And for our purposes, we defined the response to the COVID pandemic as what we really wanted to dig into and understand how they were feeling. And in order to do that, we went through a brainstorming process where we kind of cleared the air and figured out everything that we could think of that fit into these different things. And we gave voice to our persona, writing our sticky notes in the first person. And you'll note that this is a very orderly sticky note board because it's a digital tool that we use called Miro. that is really useful for us. And now, because we're all remote, but always because we are often working with remote clients. And tools like Miro give you sort of a virtual space to do this kind of work, and also let you have sort of a digital record, a downloadable, exportable to Excel or Google Spreadsheets record of all you're doing, which is really useful. There's nothing that really replaces an in-person workshop and doing this side by side with Sharpies and Post-its, but there are advantages to doing it this way. And so we're not sad about doing it this way. But after that tangent, we spit out as many ideas as we could and really didn't try to edit ourselves. And then we went through an exercise where we started to cluster things, because when you're doing this work with other people, inevitably people have the same ideas but express them with nuanced differences. And those nuances, it can seem redundant, but you can find a word or something that triggers a way of thinking about the problem that really turns it. So we keep everything and just sort of cluster it into more conceptual buckets. And Emily and I did this work together. When we're doing work for client projects, we often would have a room full of stakeholders kind of all contributing at the same time. So it really is a way to externalize institutional knowledge about customers. And even if you don't have a shiny new set of research data to feed into this, when you get enough people into a room, especially people who have firsthand experience working with customers and customers or internal audiences, whoever the user is you're thinking about, you find that you have a lot of latent knowledge to contribute. And when it comes together, you can spot those trends. And then you have a tool that, even if it's not completely informed by primary research, you have something that you can check through future research efforts. So after we clustered, we gave them little labels. And so now we have a little bit of a way of thinking about who our person is and how they're thinking, feeling, saying, and doing. And we do these kinds of things again because they're alignment tools that help everyone who's on the team understand who we're designing for, who we're innovating for, and to make kind of design decisions less subjective. If when you're thinking about adding a feature or developing a new product or a new marketing message, whatever it is you're thinking of putting out into the world, and you say, that's great, but how would Nicole react to it? You have flesh and blood on a person that you can really test the idea against. So when we went through this step by step, we'll just give you a little bit of a flavor of what we learned. So when we looked at what people were thinking, we were asking ourselves, what kinds of things were they not saying aloud? What refrains were going through their head? What were they preoccupied with? And for this particular persona, we knew that they were competitive and concerned about what their peers were doing. They had a lot of questions. They were already planning because they're very proactive and business savvy. And they're thinking about a lot of the practicalities of how they can get ahead of this. What are the guidelines? And then, of course, with everyone, there's worries about what if they fail and regrets. When we looked at what they were feeling in this particular moment, when they're responding to COVID, we want to think about what's their general state of mind. And really, a lot of the things that come up here are going to be almost universal to a population going through something like this altogether. And so we're really trying to think about what feelings are more specific to this particular persona. And for them, beyond the stress and anxiety that might be more general, they might feel a little bit of a loss of control because they're used to sort of helming their business and being the central practitioner. And they might be feeling more proactive because, again, kind of competitive, and feel like they might be the one to make it through this and a little bit smarter than average and ready to go. We also look at what people might be doing sort of physically and actually like interacting with during this time, who they're talking to, what actions they're taking. Our professional entrepreneurs were hustling, getting in line first for programs, calling their lawyers, really making sure that they were lined up to succeed and that they weren't wasting any time. And then finally, what are they saying aloud? What face are they putting out to the public about what's happening in this and how they're going to get through it? And this audience, again, they're very confident and really have a lot of faith in their own abilities and abilities to get through this with pragmatism and resilience. Now, once we've sort of established that big picture of who the user is and really dug into what they're thinking, feeling, doing, and saying as sort of a general reaction to this big moment in their lives and their business lives, we next wanted to take a more holistic look at an experience and really uncover the stages of what they went through and how they decided to move, what they did at each step of the way as they sort of understood what was happening. And to do that, we were looking at making a journey map, which again, many of you have probably done something like this in the past, where you break out a limited experience, a delineated experience for a specific person and look at the different phases along the way and what kinds of things they're doing in different aspects of that experience to hopefully identify opportunities. And again, journey maps can be used as an alignment tool. They really help you break down processes into actionable parts. So it's not just sort of a mindset, but it's an experience that has distinct touch points and places where you might be able to intervene with a solution or an optimization to help them move through the process or achieve their goals faster. And if we're looking at the sort of basic anatomy of a user journey, we have an actor, or in this case, we'll be choosing a persona. We have a scenario of what phases we're going to go through and what the kind of context of the overall map is going to express and demonstrate. And then we also have what they're expecting to get through this scenario. So we're kind of articulating from their perspective what the overall goals are. And then with that, we look at their goals, actions, mindsets, emotions, pain points, opportunities. There's a number of different kinds of journey maps, and you'll see all different facets explored and really kind of broken out. We're going to do a pretty basic one, but you can see all different examples. But generally, a good journey is building from the customer's point of view, not a business point of view. And that's why it's so important to us at Cake and Arrow to start with that foundational understanding of the user, especially if you can get it through primary user research by talking to actual customers. And ideally, it's capturing their perceptions relative to their goals, illustrating their future or current journey across multiple touch points. Journeys can be kind of bounded by different contexts. So you can look at a customer journey with a specific product or tackling a specific challenge broadly. You can look at a before and after customer journey. So there's different ways of framing it. And we also wanted to visualize the experience to optimize stakeholders' understanding, engagement, and really help with that decision making. And this is an example of a sort of refined customer journey. So after we've gone through the post-it note phase, we kind of synthesize it and illustrate it in a way that is even more kind of actionable and tangible. And so this is kind of like an end state customer journey with a visual indication of emotional state and some of the touch points and actions visualized. Other kinds of journeys can use a more sort of storyboard, illustrative approach in their final state. This one's showing a customer journey and identifying vulnerable points along an existing experience, and so looking for opportunities to fix those problems for people. And as I said, there's a lot of different types of journeys. We're going to be looking today at more of an experience map that is mapping a general experience without reference to a specific business, because we're really looking at the reaction to an external event, the pandemic, and how they're navigating that, because we want to find net new ways of serving them. So in order to make the map, we again start with a template. And for this particular activity, we used a pretty basic matrix with our phases across the top and the facets of the experience down the left. The first thing we did was fill in our scenario and who we were doing this for. So our persona is the professional entrepreneur responding to the COVID-19 crisis. And their expectations for this are really just to kind of keep the practice afloat and maybe hopefully to kind of come out ahead. Next, we want to articulate goals. So we went through another brainstorming process where we just sort of had as many ideas as we could across the different phases. And I think I forgot to explain that we defined our phases as pre-crisis and denial, a moment where there's dawning awareness and acceptance, the phase when it's sort of an immediate triage, what do we need to do to kind of stabilize the business, time to adapt and figure out how to make the most of it, and then starting to plan for the new normal. And as we started thinking about what their goals might be at each stage of this journey, we thought about business growth or savings goals, operational improvements, potential social or emotional benefits. And if we kind of zoom in on this a little bit, you can see some of the detail. We're not going to go through this in detail, but you see, like, when we're looking at the awareness and acceptance phase, somebody like our persona might really want to be able to quantify those risks because they're not necessarily risk averse, but they want to have all the information they can. And during triage, they're really motivated to stabilize their finances and have the tools and the know-how to do it. And so they're proactively going to be making calls and things. And if we look at the actions here, you see this persona, what are they doing to help themselves reach those goals? Who are they talking to? What resources might they use? This person is immediately, I think I said before, going to be in line for getting lines of credit, making contingency plans, doing everything they can think of to really get themselves as settled as possible. They're not panicking, they're taking action. And we look at mindsets across the journey too. What's their emotional state? How are they feeling? What are the trends that go from phase to phase? What carries over, and how do things kind of phase up and down? And sometimes we use some little emoticon type things to help us express those. But as you see early on, our professional entrepreneur was feeling pretty confident and optimistic and in control, and gradually sort of shifted into something more pragmatic, but still proactive. They're not, again, they're not panicking. And then they are going into a motivated, energized, really trying to fix the solution for them. Next up, we look at what touch points they're actually interacting with, what tools and resources they're using to help them solve their problems, where the points of interaction are. And this is where, when you're doing something like this, you can start to feel like you're just stating the obvious. Of course, they're talking to their staff. Of course, they're talking to their banks. But when you start like really thinking about what those different touch points are and where they are sort of peaking in the experience, you start to see some patterns, and you start to identify some interesting things when the banks come in, when the government agencies come in, and when it makes sense to talk to your landlord about, do we have to pay the rent this month? Next up, we try to articulate specific pain points, and we draw on the interviews and what we actually heard from our users' mouths about what they're going through at this time. And a lot of it is about not having the tools and not having sort of trustworthy, reliable guidance through all of this. And their frustrations are a lot about why can't the institutions and agencies run themselves as well as I'm running my business? I just need the facts. And then from there, we look at the sum total of each of these columns and start brainstorming opportunities to meet our persona's needs at these different phases. What what might be solutions or just areas of exploration to think about what could happen. And again, we're not doing this with any particular business in mind. So we're just sort of free range thinking about what kinds of things might help this person get through this experience and what would they appreciate and value. And so for this person, things like an advanced warning system, potentially from a professional organization, a way to connect with a peer group and actually create a task force, because something we heard from the professional entrepreneur is that they don't necessarily trust. If we talked to a chiropractor, he didn't trust all chiropractors, but he trusted his chiropractors, the ones that he kind of knew were as savvy as he was and as motivated as he was. And he would have kind of joined forces with them to develop some approaches and best practices for how to deal with them. And as we kind of shift over, we've been ignoring the latter half of this, but when we're starting to look at opportunities for planning for the new normal, another thing that came up that was kind of interesting with this audience was how to alter their office space to accommodate health concerns, because they were working in such close proximity to people, but they need their small offices. So is there a way to kind of right size by working together, sharing space or swapping spaces? And that felt like something that when we started talking about it, we got a little bit excited about thinking about the energy around that and how might that turn into something that we could flesh out and think about business models around. And so going through this process, we'd been through the interviews together. We'd heard firsthand from users who they were and what they cared about. And we thought we knew it. But by mapping it out and really breaking it down, we got to a place that like it didn't come up until literally the last square on the Jeopardy board here. And we were like, oh, that's really exciting. That's really interesting. That's what maybe we'll take to the next phase. And going through these processes, it doesn't take long. Again, the persona building, the empathy mapping, and this journey map, we probably did in about a day and a half, maybe 2 days all told, after the interviews. And we feel like the output from this research that we've done will be so much stronger because we've taken the time to really synthesize and play with what we learned and play it out in different scenarios and think about it from different angles. So when we go to write the white paper and really explain what we learned, we're going to have insights that never would have come from just reading our notes or just kind of talking about it. Externalizing the information, looking at it together, mapping it out, brought us to new places and new exciting places. So what's next for this work? As I said, we are going to be refining this journey map. It's really a working draft. We're going to be mapping and exploring opportunities across the different personas that we introduced. So we just did this for one type of small business owner that we're interested in. We might flesh out some of those opportunities, whether it's the office swapping and sharing or something else, that we would then kind of design a proof of concept, some expression of the idea that we could concept test with users. And then we'll be compiling our findings, synthesizing and writing a report. And you can watch that for that report. It'll be coming in the next month or so and should have some exciting movement on what you've seen today and playing it out. But mostly what we wanted to do today was share with you our process about how we're thinking about getting in front of customers or potential users of anything we might design or innovate right now and making sense of something that's happening in real time without a huge investment. And what we want you to take away from this whole webinar is that you can do this too. You can talk to customers, schedule a handful of interviews right now. Even a tiny sample can help you focus your questions and find opportunities and check your assumptions. You can actually invite your customers to help you imagine how you could help them through this time. And then we really say, make those maps, really externalize what you're learning, make it visible so everyone can see it, so you can align and so you can see where you either need to research further or where you might want to act. And with that, we are about at time after our short, slow start. Again, apologies and thank you all for hanging on the line. I think if we have any questions, we can take those in the Q&A now. And we'll look for that. But thanks again for all your attention, and really appreciate your attendance. And Emily, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I'm looking for how to open up the questions, and I don't know if you're able to do that. Oh, we have a question. How do we recruit participants to interview? That's a great question, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about some different tools that we use to do that. There are a lot of online recruiting tools that are pretty affordable. Sometimes we use something called respondent.io that you can sort of put in your parameters in a screening interview, and they will kind of help you schedule interviews. And oftentimes we're also reaching out to friends and family. For something like this, we had enough people within our circle to talk to friends of friends and really get a representative sample. And another thing that we've done recently is using Facebook actually to target specific audiences and invite them to take a screener survey through like SurveyMonkey or something like that, and then we reach out to them. There's a question, do you work with insurance brokers? We do. We do a lot of work within the insurance space, and we work with everything from carriers, reinsurers, brokers. We look at quote and bind flows, optimizing those. We also do sort of more strategic ideation and innovation work, where we're doing kind of what we're talking about now, where we speak directly to either end customers or internal audiences, brokers, agents, and figure out what their needs are. Somebody asked what the software we used was for the brainstorming. It's called Miro, M-I-R-O, and so far we really recommend it. So, I don't know if we have more questions, but again, thanks so much to everyone who participated. The deck will be distributed after this, and all of the links in here should be live. There are some resources and things. And we also, again, will be sharing with our network over social networks and our mailing lists the output of this report soon. What would a project with a producer broker look like? I'm going to open up this to some of our colleagues. Tim, can you speak to what a project with a producer broker looks like, or potentially?
Yeah, absolutely. Are you able to hear me, Kate?
Yep.
Great. You know, often we're looking at like digital projects with them. What kind of tools are they using that can help them run their day-to-day business? Sometimes this is being brought to them, you know, from a carrier partner that they're, you know, writing on their paper, but it's really how can we structure things to make, you know, more effective use of their time as salespeople? How can we make sure that the conversations and the tools that are facilitating those are in support of, you know, actual customer needs? And a lot of times it's things about digitization. How can we reduce paper processes? How can we make collaboration more transparent between them and their clients? And figuring out, you know, what is the required journey, both from their perspective and their customer's perspective. And then within those touch points, how is that communicated in the digital experience? That's a traditional type of project. It also can be, you know, researching new distribution points and mechanisms, finding ways to put together different value propositions for where you might distribute products. Can be pretty varied there.
Thanks, Tim. Somebody else is asking, for an insurance company, can we actually use distributors or our agents as respondents since they have firsthand interaction to customers? And we would say absolutely. When we talk about customers or users, we're talking about anyone that you need to serve to reach your business goals. And so many of our projects are actually targeting some of those internal audiences. Um, well, thanks to everyone who's stayed on the line. If there's any further questions, happy to take those, but we are a few minutes over, so don't want to ruin your lunch hour. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And really appreciate your patience with our earlier sort of snafu, and looking forward to talking to some of you in the future. Thanks again.